So my name is Elizabeth Sanchez, and I am currently the program coordinator for Kern Sol News. So as the program coordinator, I do a lot of different things. I will train students on their journalism skills, so that could be interviewing, basic writing skills, it could be data reporting. I also do a lot of the editing and updating the website, and occasionally I will do some reporting. I got into journalism, 6 years ago after I graduated in 2015 from UC Santa Barbara. I didn't know I was going to be in journalism. I started looking for jobs and I found a job with the Bakersfield Californian. And so I was with the Californian for 3 years, and I've been with Kern Sol News for the past 3 years. So it's been a journey. I've learned a lot working with different people and the community. It's been very rewarding. So our mission at Kern Sol News is to really focus on youth reporters, and we want to focus on youth because youth have stories to tell, and a lot of the times people don't listen to their stories. And so we have youth from Delano, we have Bakersfield, Arvin, McFarland. We've started little cohorts in each of one of these cities, and we like to hear those stories because a lot of the mainstream media doesn't always tell the stories from their perspective. And so who better to tell their stories than themselves, right? Especially during the pandemic, these students were going through so many things that weren't being talked about. Sure, we all knew that students were in distance learning, but do we actually know how they're feeling about it? What are they struggling and what do they need, right? We also heard stories about how their parents are losing their jobs. I remember we had this incredible story from one of our youth reporters. She lived in Delano, and both of her parents were farm workers. And one of her parents got laid off. Neither of her parents they were both undocumented, and so they didn't qualify for unemployment because they aren't citizens, and they didn't qualify to receive a stimulus check. So not only was their income cut in half, but they also couldn't receive these benefits that all of us are receiving, or a lot of us are receiving. And unfortunately, her parents, they were essential workers, and they weren't receiving any assistance. So we like to tell those stories because a lot of the time, people don't know what's going on. So that's our mission, is to tell their stories. So like I said, I've only been with Kern Sol News for 6 years. So when it originally started in 2011, it was called South Kern Sol. It really just focused on what was happening in South Kern, so like the Arvin, Lamont area. They started with just that one cohort in Arvin. There's a lot of high school students, which is awesome. But we've just grown with funding and our staff, so we've been able to expand throughout Kern County. We try to cover as much of Kern County as we can. Of course, there's limitations with staff and technology, and anyway. So we've just expanded beyond and try to cover those stories that aren't being told in these rural areas. Being a good journalist and a good writer isn't just about writing. It's also about being a good listener. You're talking to people, you're asking them questions, you're hearing their stories. And so being attentive and a good listener, being understanding about what these people are going through, trying to be empathetic. And I think being naturally curious to ask questions is very important. And for us, I think it's very important to have just a passion to want to make a difference in your community. There's so many inequities that we try to shed light on. So if you have the passion where you want to make a difference, that's a huge plus for us. So it's, again, not just about writing. There's so much more to it. And if you work with Kern Sol News, we train you on those writing skills. So you don't have to be a perfect writer. You can always receive the help. Yeah, I definitely encourage them to do it. Don't let that barrier or hardship stop, students who are English learners. If you're going to, BC or CCB, go to the Writing Center, seek some help, talk to your professors. Like I said, it's very important. I would hope that these professors in the Writing Center would have an understanding of, where they're struggling and why they're struggling. But also, we have Hispanic media outlets here. We have El Popular, we have Telemundo, Univision. So just, if they're too timid to maybe jump into the English media, maybe start with the Spanish media, and you can learn from there and then transition to English media. But like I said, at Kern Sol News, we have a lot of Spanish speakers, and we work with them, and we try our best to, train them and communicate with them. What we stress is people care about people. We don't necessarily care too much about stats and facts. Although those things are important, data is very important, we really stress the importance of people and their stories. So if I were to tell you, oh, Kern Public Health announced, 33 more COVID cases today. That's not that interesting, but if I told you a story about how one person's plasma donation saved another person's life because they had COVID-19, that's a story that we want to tell, because again, we care about people's stories. And those stats and data are just an added bonus to the story, but really just having that passion to tell someone's story. We have a few key topics that we focus on. Really, we love to shed light, like I've said, we love to shed light on the inequities happening in Kern County. So a few of the topics that we focus on is education. We focus on health, environmental injustices. We focus on immigration. Let's see. A lot of our reporting lately has been on COVID-19. But when I talk about health and education, we don't just talk about, what the latest news is at the school board. We talk about why are they taking out summer school and which families is this impacting? How is it impacting those summer schools? We look at which zip codes are being the hardest hit by COVID-19. There are disparities out there. There's a reason why certain zip codes are being hit harder than other zip codes. So we like to shed light on those stories. So yes, with 2020 happening, with the presidential election, the sad death of George Floyd, and so many other things that happened throughout these last few years, the pandemic, I think that more people have become more outspoken and there's been a huge division in our country. And I believe that division was already there, but people are just more outspoken about it. I think with these events though, it allows us to have a conversation, and these are very, very needed conversations, and it sparks this fire in people to bring about change. And so I think as a journalist, we want to help raise awareness of that change that we want to see in our communities. And so we write about those topics. What does the death of George Floyd mean for the Black community? What does it mean for Kern County? What does it mean for our police department? What does it mean for our board of supervisors? All these people play roles, so we need to talk about this. Same with the presidential election. We have a completely new leader who has new tactics and who has new goals. So let's talk about that. Let's not live in the past with President Trump. Let's start living with President Biden and what is the good that he's going to do for our country. So we need to have these conversations. I think they're important, even though that there is such division. These conversations do need to be had. So for people who are stuck in 2020 or on President Trump's side, like I've said before, being a good listener is very important. Although we don't all agree on the same things, I think that it's important to listen, because for me personally, I'm not someone who is, confrontational and will want to prove someone wrong, even though we believe in different things. I think it's very important to listen, to try to understand where they're coming from, and just have a conversation. Okay, this is where you're coming from. Well, this is where I'm coming from, and these are the reasons why. And let's try to agree to disagree. Let's not yell at each other or physically fight or, everything we were seeing in 2020 and even in 21 at the beginning with the storming of the Capitol. We don't need to be doing that to each other. There's a way to agree to disagree in a calm and peaceful manner. I see people agree to disagree. I do see it sometimes, but not as often as I should. Unfortunately, I believe that, with the Trump presidency, people felt that it was okay to vocalize hate language and hateful actions. And so I feel like that has almost become a norm now, which is not okay. So I would love to see more people to have conversations and agree to disagree, but unfortunately that is not the case. Okay, so 3 tips for youth reporters to have good conversations with people of different values. I think the first one, like I've said before, is being a good listener. So not just sticking in your head about, well, I believe this and I'm not going to listen to, what you think, which is different. You have to be a good listener, and you have to be understanding about not everyone's going to agree. We're not going to all have the same values. And so just having the willingness to understand where someone's coming from and being a good listener. The second tip would be, like I've said before, be naturally curious and ask questions. So if someone doesn't agree with you, ask, well, why? Where does that come from? Because there's a story behind what people believe in. And so trying to understand where that person's coming from, even though you don't necessarily agree, So again, asking those questions. And 3 would be just being eager to learn. We talk to so many people as journalists who are experts in all these different fields, and so I love learning from people. I love learning from people who are in the education field and what are they an expertise in. I love learning about people who do environmental justice work. That's something that I am not knowledgeable about. So when I can talk to someone about pesticide regulation, that sparks a fire in me to want to write about that more. And so I think that is also very important, just being eager to learn. So I believe Latinx students, dreamers, students from immigrant backgrounds should definitely become involved in journalism, because who better to tell their stories than themselves? I am a citizen. I was born in America, so I can't even begin to understand the hardships or the barriers that these students face. And so I want to hear from them. I want them to tell their stories, because I shouldn't be telling their stories. And the important thing, what's in it for them, is we've had legislators read our stories and want to bring about change because of the story that we wrote. And so if we have undocumented youth writing about what they're experiencing, what their family's experiencing, what their parents are experiencing, those legislators could read that story and say, I never knew that, or I never thought about that, I never understood that. And so if we have our legislators reading our stories from undocumented youth, from dreamers, that could spark a whole new change for the better for our community and for that population. So I really encourage undocumented youth and dreamers and youth with immigrant backgrounds, even youth who have parents who are immigrants. I really encourage those people to get into journalism because their stories are so, so important. So Kern Sol News, we were actually the first media outlet to report on this story about one of our assembly members was granting some exemptions to a local oil refinery, and that would allow this oil refinery to basically operate without regulation, which would provide a bunch of health concerns for the community around this oil refinery. Of course, this oil refinery was in a rural community, so it was affecting low-income people in a rural community. And so we saw that, and so we reported on it. Once we published the story, it's all these media outlets from across the state started picking up the story. And that put so much pressure on the assembly member that the assembly member ended up pulling the bill. And so now that oil refinery has to abide by all the regulations that every other oil refinery has to. So that was a huge win for us. We were working hard to keep that community healthy and safe, and so that was very exciting. Another story was, this was before I got to Kern Sol News, but this is a big win for us too. A youth reporter wrote about unsafe drinking water at her school. And all this information came out about how students should be drinking from the water fountains, and she ended up writing about it. And again, all these other media outlets picked it up. The school decided to install filtered water fountains, so they now had access to clean drinking water. So it's just exciting to see that our stories can make a change when it comes to people who make decisions. So those are a few of our wins. So under the Trump administration, I do think that his language of putting the phrase fake news out there, I think it did hurt a lot of media outlets. It gave a lot of people who don't want to believe some news organizations, it gave them some ammunition to go against media outlets. I definitely believe I believe there are some media outlets out there who aren't always truthful, but I also believe that the majority of media outlets out there are truthful, and they have a mission to educate their communities, educate their readership, which is so important. It's so important for us to be informed about what's happening in our community. It's so important for us to be informed about what our elected leaders are doing, what our education boards are doing, what our health officials are doing, because if we didn't have this information, how would we bring about change? We would never know the inequities that are happening in our communities without journalism. So journalism is very, very important. Communications is very important, and for those people who are second guessing it because of, the era of fake news, I would say ignore that, because this is a key industry. And people say it's a dying industry. I don't see it going anywhere. I see it being more valuable than it has ever been in the past. So I've heard it all. I've heard that Kern Sol news is biased. I've heard that people don't take us seriously. And that just encourages me to keep doing the work that I'm doing. I believe that, you know, Kern Sol News' mission is to shed light on inequities happening throughout Kern County. If you think that's biased, great. We're going to keep telling our stories about people. We're going to keep telling our stories about what is hurting the people in our communities. We were the first media outlet to report about which zip codes are being hit the hardest by COVID-19. That's not biased to me. Those are stories that need to be told. And so we're not going to stop telling those stories. And I've seen it so many times where our officials in Kern County don't take our youth reporters seriously because of our age. But that doesn't stop them from telling their stories. Their stories are just as important as stories being told by adults. You know, these students are gaining so many skills, and they're going to do amazing things because of the skills that they're gaining with our program. And I think this is just the first step to them creating a change in their community, and that's what we're going to keep doing.